Who actually created God? The Buddha's answer to the ultimate mystery. The mind is constantly creating worlds for itself to live in. Sometimes they're based on things you're experiencing right now, but there's always an element that comes in from the past, your assumptions, your narratives, your sense of who you are, so that even pleasant experiences in the present moment can be turned into pain as they stir up issues from the past, or as you bring issues from the past to bear on the present. Conversely, you can be in a lot of pain in the present moment, but not suffer at all, again, depending on what you've brought from the past, how you're constructing your world right now. So, as we're on the path to practice, we're creating a different world. Ultimately, we go beyond this need to create worlds for ourselves. But there's only one kind of world that's going to allow you to do that. That's the world in which the mind is in a good, solid state of concentration. So you have to firmly believe that you need this world, and you're not going to let any of your other worlds come in and interfere with it. Especially when this world is not all that solid, you've got to have a strong sense of boundaries, that anything that's not helpful in the construction of a world of peace and well-being in the mind won't be welcome in. You want to get to the point where this is your home. In Pali, they talk about having a vihara, or a dwelling place for the mind. That means you're able to take a particular theme or a particular topic for concentration and stay with it long enough that you're really dwelling there. You're not hopping around from one timeshare place to another timeshare place. You've got a home. Then, when the home is really solidly built and very comfortable, you can start inviting some of your old unpleasant friends back in so that you get to really know them in a safer environment. At the same time, you can begin to take apart some of those other worlds you've been living in. But ideally, you have to wait until the concentration is strong enough to handle these things. There are some times when outside issues are really pressing, and you have to make do with whatever concentration you've got to deal with them, because the issues demand resolution right away. But there are a lot of other issues that you've been living with for years and years and years, and it's not that you have to solve them tonight, or this week, or this month. You've got to build up your strength in the meantime. The reason we go for those other worlds is because there's some pleasure in them. There's something we delight in the different worlds. But the problem is that each of those worlds has its drawbacks. Sometimes we're conscious of the drawbacks, and we deny to ourselves that there's a pleasure there. Then other times we're more conscious of the pleasure and try to deny the drawbacks. What we need is a world where we can look at things in all fairness, to see both the drawbacks and the delight that we have in our different worlds. Then we can weigh them, give them their proper weight. In some cases, it hurts to see where we've been taking our pleasure, which is why this home of concentration has to be really solid, really strong. The sense of well-being that comes from it has to be really, really pervasive. The creator of worlds. As the Buddha once said, you can see the drawbacks of your old attachments and understand them, but if you don't have an alternative source of pleasure, that is, the pleasure that comes from a well-concentrated mind, you're not going to be able to give up all those other old pleasures. So you've got to have trust in this concentration. Even though it seems like you're shutting off the windows, shutting off the doors, pretending that things are not there, that's not the case. You're preparing yourself. You're preparing the mind so that it can actually handle these issues with strength, confidence, and fairness. The pleasure that comes from concentration allows you to see these other pleasures for what they really are. And some of them are pretty miserable pleasures. Others are not so miserable, but they're pretty weak compared to the sense of well-being that can come when the mind settles down. In the beginning, it's going to be a fight because you've been living in these other worlds for a long time, and you feel comfortable in them. They're like an old shoe. It may not necessarily be good for your foot, but it's the shoe you're used to. These other new shoes don't feel quite right yet, but you have to keep reminding yourself, this is how you prepare the mind so that it can really deal with its issues. After all, When the Buddha gained awakening, he gained it from this position, the position of a well-concentrated mind. It was here that his equanimity and mindfulness became pure. You're feeding the mind on skillful pleasures. You're going to be holding on to this, but it's a skillful thing to hold on to. You've got a sense of well-being that nourishes the mind so that you don't have to go feeding in hidden corners, feeding off of other people's scraps. So this is food for the mind, shelter for the mind, medicine for the mind. It provides the mind with all of its requisites. You can think of it as creating an honest judge in your mind. If you have a judge who's hungry, he's going to try to please the people he can feed off of. He's going to be preying on this group he can feed off of, and being unfair to another group because he doesn't feel he can get anything out of them. But if the judge is well fed, then he doesn't have to feed on any of the people he's passing judgment on. He's more likely to be fair in his judgments. So you try to put the mind in a good place. It may involve some struggle, but it's not always going to be struggle. And even though it involves some attachment, because you will be attached to this state of concentration, it's a much better attachment than places where you're already attached. It's very ironic that you hear so much about the dangers of being attached to concentration. The Buddha himself mentioned only one danger, which is that once you've got here, you may not be inclined to want to move on to awakening. But that particular attachment is something very easy to deal with once you recognize it for what it is. You can compare that with the dangers of being attached to sensual pleasures, which are much stronger and much more dangerous. Even in the so-called jhana wars, you don't hear of anybody actually killing or stealing or having illicit sex or lying or taking intoxicants because of their attachment to jhana. It's the people who are attached to sensuality. Those are the ones who kill and steal and have illicit sex and lie and take intoxicants, creating all sorts of havoc in the world. It's from the position of concentration that eventually you can learn to totally let go. Sensual attachments are like potato chips. You've had one then, you have to have another then another, but they don't really nourish you. They just fill you up, but they're not really good for you. So it's important that you have confidence in the practice of concentration. It puts the mind in a world where it can actually judge its other worlds fairly, see where there's the delight in that particular world, that particular narrative, that particular way of looking at things, and also see the drawbacks of those particular worlds. As a result, you find that your craving and clinging for those worlds begins to clear away, clear away, clear away. When there's no craving or clinging for them, you're not creating them anymore. They seem real now, simply because they're so habitual. The world of concentration seems to be artificial because we're not yet skilled at creating it. But as you get more and more accustomed to it, you find that it's a much preferable world, and you see things a lot more clearly. After all, you're creating a sense of awareness that fills the body, a sense of well-being that can saturate the body. When the mind has been fed and sheltered like this, then it's in a position where it can see things clearly, can handle all of its old attachments because it's got something better to hold on to. So, as you're creating this world, if anything comes up, no matter how insistent it is, just remind yourself that that's another world, and you're not sure you want to keep on living in worlds of that sort. And remember that those other worlds are creations. You're creating them right now, a memory from the past. No matter how real it was in the past, now it's a creation. You can choose to include that in your narrative or not. For the time being, just say, no narratives dealing with that. Only the narratives dealing with the breath right now. If the mind does get involved with narratives of the past, tweak the narratives so that they incline you to come back here. Remind yourself of how much you've been suffering by staying in those narratives, carrying those memories around. Remind yourself of your desire to put those burdens down. Well, this is the place where you can do it. That way, the narrative delivers you back here to the present moment, delivers you back to the breath. Once you're here, you can drop the narrative. Stay right here. Get acquainted right here. Make this your home. For all too long, the present moment has been a bus station. Anybody can come in, anybody can go out. And you keep traveling around in these buses of these different worlds, what they call Bhava, or becoming. When they deliver you back to the bus station, you hop on the next bus. Sometimes they don't even deliver you back here. You just go from one bus to the next, and you end up in Nevada, Nebraska, the Northwest Territories. So come back to the bus station and clean it out, make it a home. Close the windows, close the doors for the time being. Anyone who comes knocking say, "This isn't a bus station anymore. This is my home. I'm going to stay here." A John Cha's image is of a house that has only one chair, and you're sitting in the chair. No matter who comes into the house, they're your guests. You're not obliged to show them any hospitality because you're sitting in the chair. Nobody else gets to sit in the chair because the person in the chair is in charge. You want to make this your home. You want to belong here because the strength that comes from being right here, the sense of well-being that comes from being right here, is what will eventually allow you to take those worlds apart and to see them for what they are. They were just creations causing suffering, but you kept on creating them anyhow. And you realize you don't need to do that anymore because you find you have everything you need right here. Karma and causality. The texts tell us that after the Buddha's awakening, he sat in meditation for 49 days, experiencing the bliss of release. However, when he reported his awakening to others, his shortest expression of what he experienced was a principle of causality. Many people find this disappointing. They would like to hear that enlightenment has lots of lights and action, and they want to hear about all of the blissful and wonderful things the Buddha experienced during those 49 days. A second reason why people are disappointed by the fact that the Buddha summarized his awakening in terms of a causal principle is because causality seems very dry. It's a question of metaphysics, and many people like to believe that the Buddha avoided metaphysics and taught only psychology instead. It's true that he avoided many metaphysical questions, such as whether the universe was finite or infinite, eternal or not. But he avoided them not because they were metaphysical, but because they were irrelevant to developing the path to the end of suffering. However, there are some metaphysical issues that are relevant to the path. Because the Buddha taught a path of action, he had to teach a metaphysics of action to show how action works. His reason for focusing on this principle of causality as the most basic lesson of awakening was to show us how the mind works, and particularly, how we can use the actions of the mind to put an end to suffering. This is why he had to explain causality to show what human action is, what it can do, and why. And as I explained last night, the principle of causality he awoke to is directly related to a psychologically healthy attitude toward action, an attitude that enables us both to live skillfully in general and in particular to master the path of action that the Buddha taught. So the metaphysics and the psychology he taught actually fit seamlessly together. Causality was a very hotly debated topic in India during his time. Some teachers taught determinism, other people taught chaos, others said that human action had no power at all. So the Buddha had to explain causality to show that human action was capable of putting an end to suffering, and that we have the freedom to choose to follow the path to the end of suffering, or not. We have to remember that, for the Buddha, the mind is basically an active phenomenon, and his basic image for your mind's relationship to the environment is that you like to feed. You start with desire that comes from hunger. We take on a sense of becoming, which is a sense of your identity in a particular world of experience. The world, here, is related to whatever you want to feed on, and your sense of identity has to do with two things. One is your sense of what abilities you have to find the happiness you want. This is called yourself as a producer. The other sense of self concerns your identity as the being who is going to experience that happiness. That's the self as consumer. Both of these senses of self need to feed. The producer needs nourishment to produce. The consumer can't stand not feeding. Because the mind is proactive, we approach all experience with a question: what to do? As long as hunger is driving the mind, the question becomes, what to do in order to feed our hunger? Our intentions aim at finding an answer to that question. We want to escape the feeling of pain that comes with hunger, and we want to feel the pleasure that comes when our hunger is assuaged. We pay attention to this question, and our perceptions are shaped by it. We're doing this all the time, creating karma this way in the present all the time, and our karma gives results. Sometimes what we want, sometimes not. Now, the Buddha's explanation of the principle of causality to explain karma sounds very simple on the surface. It's composed of two pairs of principles working together. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the stopping of this comes the stopping of that. At first glance, these statements seem to say nothing more than that there are causes and there are effects. That's the first impression you get. But when you look more carefully at them, taking the connected statements in pairs, you see that there are two principles interacting. The first pair is this. When there is this, there is that. When this isn't, that isn't. This describes causality in the present moment. The cause is simultaneous with the result, and when the cause disappears, the result immediately disappears. The second pair describes causality over time. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the stopping of this comes the stopping of that. The cause may appear and disappear at one time, but the effect can come and go either right away or much later. An example of the first kind of causality would be if you put your finger on the stove. You don't have to wait until your next lifetime to get the result. Similarly, if you spit into the wind, it's going to come right back at you immediately. That's simultaneous causality. An example of the second type of causality. When you plant a seed in the field, you won't get a mature plant right away. It will take time, well after you stop the action of planting the seed. What does this have to do with us? Our experience consists of the combination of these two principles. At any one moment in time, you will have the results of some past actions appearing. You also have your present actions, along with some of the results of those present actions. From the point of view of karma, this means that your experience is shaped to some extent by past actions, but also by present actions, and the present actions are actually the most important ones to attend to because you have freedom of choice concerning which actions you'll do in the present. Your past actions are like raw material for the present moment, and your present actions are the act of shaping that raw material into an experience. To compare this to food, your past actions provide the raw food, and your present actions put it in a form that you can actually feed on it. As a matter of fact, you experience your present karma prior to your past karma, in the same way that you find food only after the act of looking for it. This point comes in dependent co-arising. As we will see, present karma consists of fabrication and the sub-factors coming under the factor of name in name and form. Past karma is the experience of the six senses, which comes after the factors of fabrication and name. What this means in terms of our direct experience is that by the time we're aware of sensory input, we're already primed to experience it in a certain way. This fact can cause us a lot of trouble, but it also opens the way to free us from suffering. If suffering depends on the way we prime our minds, then if we prime them in a skillful way, we don't have to suffer even when the input from the senses, past karma, is bad. So in this way, you have two principles of causality combining to form a causal pattern that follows some regular laws but nevertheless allows for freedom of choice. This combination is also precisely what would be required in order to develop skills. It's because actions and their results follow a certain regular pattern that we can learn from them. It's because we have freedom of choice in the present moment that we can use what we've learned to become more and more skillful. All of this is why the Buddha never says that someone deserves to suffer because of an action. He simply says that certain actions tend to lead to certain results. But those results will also be shaped by the state of mind when those results come. If we develop a good state of mind in the present, we don't have to suffer even when encountering the effects of our bad past karma. If we didn't have this ability to choose our approach to the present moment, we would simply have to suffer from our past actions. And as the Buddha noted, if this were the case, no one could reach an end of suffering or gain awakening. Now, because the two different principles are interacting, they create a complex system. In physics, these are called nonlinear systems, which have many feedback loops. An example of a feedback loop would be what happens when you put a microphone connected to a loudspeaker in front of the loudspeaker. A sound picked up by the microphone will get amplified many, many times until it's deafening. That's called a positive feedback loop, not because it's positively good, but because it tends to intensify the original event. Another example would be a heater connected to a thermostat in the same room. When the heater raises the room temperature to a certain point, the thermostat will turn it off. When the room cools to a certain point, the thermostat will turn the heater back on. This is called a negative feedback loop. Again, not because it does anything negative, but because the two members work in different directions to keep each other in check. As we're practicing, we're going to learn that our mind has many feedback loops, both positive and negative, and we're going to try to take advantage of that fact to intensify the things that we want to intensify and to keep in check the things that would cause suffering if they got out of control. One first step in taking advantage of feedback loops comes from realizing that complex nonlinear systems actually come from many simple patterns working together. The practical lesson is that we should first learn those simple patterns and not be too concerned with the complicated ways those patterns can interact. If you're skillfully in control of the simple patterns and consistently trying to develop skill in your actions, the results, however complicated, will eventually get better and better. There may be some ups and downs given that your past actions are still influencing the system, but the overall trend will tend upward. For example, in meditation, if you focus on the breath long enough, developing mindfulness, alertness, and ardency, you may not know when the results are going to come, and you may experience many setbacks, but you can have confidence that, given the fact that you keep trying, the results will eventually come at some time. The primary simple pattern of causality at work in the mind and in the world concerns moral decisions. Skillful intentions lead to pleasant results, and unskillful intentions lead to unpleasant results. This means that you can learn from your past skillful and unskillful actions, and you don't simply approach the present moment with totally fresh eyes. You may have heard some people say that each new present moment is a unique moment, but that would mean that anything you learned from the past would be irrelevant for deciding what to do right now. The Buddha, however, says that there are causal patterns that are true across the board. If you can keep those patterns in mind, then you can know how to approach any moment skillfully. An example would be the Four Noble Truths: knowing what suffering is, what its cause is, what its cessation is, and what the path to its cessation is, and knowing also that each of those carries a duty. Suffering is to be comprehended, its cause is to be abandoned, its cessation is to be realized, and the path is to be developed. You can apply this framework to any moment in time and reap beneficial results. However, complex patterns, even though they start from simple principles, do become complex as they create feedback loops, and the feedback loops feed into one another. In particular, the complexity relative to our practice to put an end to suffering comes from the psychology of a conscious mind. Sometimes intention comes before sensory input, but it can also come after. consciousness can come both before and after craving. But even though these facts may make training the mind complex, in the practice, we can learn how to take advantage of this complexity because these feedback loops allow you to change your mind at many points in the system of causes and effects. Now, there are two major drawbacks in trying to master a complex system. The first is that sometimes no clear pattern is visible in the short term. Think of weather systems, for instance. Even though weather is shaped by some very basic physical principles, we all know how inaccurate weather predictions tend to be. This is because weather is a complex system. The same happens in our own minds. This is one of the reasons why we suffer from the results of our intentions, even though we don't intend to suffer. Because sometimes it's very difficult to see any direct connection between our intentions, on the one hand, and the pleasures and pains we feel on the other. If lightning struck every time you did something unskillful, nobody would do anything unskillful. The problem is that often we don't directly see the connection. In fact, as the Buddha said, it's not always the case that our actions in this lifetime will yield their results in this lifetime. Sometimes their results won't even come in the next lifetime. They'll come only many lifetimes down the line. This means, of course, that we can experience the results of actions done many lifetimes ago, with no idea at all of where those results come from. This not only allows us to do unskillful things without thinking we're going to suffer, but it can also drive us crazy. Some scientists once did an experiment with pigeons. With one group of pigeons, every time a pigeon pressed a green button, it got food. Every time it pushed a red button, it got nothing. These pigeons were very well adjusted. They pushed just the green button and paid no attention to the red one. With the other group of pigeons, though, if a pigeon pushed a green button, sometimes it got food and sometimes it didn't. If it pressed the red button, sometimes it got food and sometimes it didn't. These pigeons became neurotic because they couldn't trust the buttons that fed them. This is human life. This is also why, when we meditate, there are a lot of ups and downs. So, that's the first drawback of a complex system. It's because of this drawback that we need to learn Dhamma from people like the Buddha, who was able to gain an enlarged perspective that allowed him to see the patterns that we would otherwise miss. The second drawback is related to the first. Because complex patterns are so unstable and, in their details, unpredictable, there's no guarantee that when you change the input, the system will show the effects of your actions right away. This means that when you start practicing, there's no way of predicting how soon you'll see the results you want. Sometimes you can meditate for days, for example, and see very little change in your mind. At other times, the changes come pretty quickly. It's all too easy in the first case to get discouraged, or in the second case to get complacent. It's because of this drawback that we need close contact with the Sangha, people who have encountered the same vagaries in their practice and can give you timely help, encouragement when you need it, and warnings when you get complacent. It's in this way that the Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅkhāra help us overcome the aspects of complex causality that would otherwise work to our detriment. But there are three other features of complex patterns that actually work to our advantage, if we know how to make use of them. The first deals with a feature I've already mentioned, the fact that feedback loops can be negative or positive. This gives you some control over what you do and don't want to develop in the mind. If there's a skillful quality you want to develop, you can try to create a positive feedback loop to make it stronger. This is what we do when we develop a sense of pleasure while focusing on the breath. Over time, the pleasure strengthens our concentration, and the concentration strengthens the pleasure and rapture. In this way, when they reinforce each other, they can provide nourishment for other skillful qualities in the mind as well. On the other hand, if there's an unskillful quality you want to weaken, or if your skillful qualities are getting out of balance, you can create a negative feedback loop to bring things under control. For instance, if you're thinking thoughts of lust, reflection on the unattractiveness of the body, helps to bring those thoughts in check. Or if you're getting a little overcome by pleasure and rapture in your concentration, you can remind yourself to bring your focus to a more subtle level of energy in the body, and that brings the rapture under control. The second feature of complex patterns that we can use to our advantage is called scale invariance. What this means is that patterns operating on the small scale also operate on the large scale. For example, scientists sometimes can create weather patterns in laboratories, and that can teach them about weather patterns in real life. The same principle applies to the mind. If you learn how to deal with what's going on in the present moment, you learn the larger patterns of karma as they apply over large spans of time. And when you learn about the larger patterns of karma over large time scales, they can teach you lessons about how to deal skillfully with your mind in the present. In fact, that's what the Buddha did on the night of his awakening. He learned about the pattern of intention and views on the large scale in his second knowledge, and then applied that pattern to his mind in the present moment in the third knowledge. A third feature of complex patterns that we can use to our advantage is that in any complex system, the principles that put the system together can also be used to take the system apart. For example, in mathematics, there is something called the three-body problem. A French mathematician, Henri Poincaré, discovered that if you trace the gravitational relationship among the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, which is a complex system, it's possible for the Moon's trajectory to reach a point called a resonance. When it reaches a resonance, it will leave its orbit and go flying off in a direction that cannot be predicted, even though up to that point it has been following the laws of gravity. The laws of gravity interact in a way that gets the Moon out of the laws of gravity and its relationship to the Earth. In the same way, even though our experience is created by fabrication, and our experience of space and time is shaped by our actions, we can still use our actions to get outside of those dimensions, to gain release. Sometimes you hear the idea that it's impossible to reach an unconditioned dimension through the conditions created by actions, but that idea comes from understanding causality in an overly simplistic way. When we understand that causality in the mind is complex, that complex system allows us to use our intentions to get beyond intentions. This is how the Buddha's path works. Even though suffering is caused by actions of the mind, we can use actions of the mind to get beyond suffering. This is why the Buddha expressed his short explanation of his own awakening in terms of his double principle of causality. It's because our actions fall into a causal pattern that we can learn from our actions. At the same time, the complexity of the pattern allows us to have freedom of choice, and to use that freedom of choice to attain the ultimate freedom. So for a quick review of how we can take advantage of the Buddha's principle of causality. First, because complex patterns come from simple patterns, we focus on the simple patterns. We don't have to try to comprehend the whole thing. In fact, the Buddha said that if you tried to comprehend all of karma, you'd go crazy. But if you understand that there are certain patterns that the mind follows, and that karma follows certain patterns, in other words, skillful intentions lead to pleasant results, and unskillful intentions lead to unpleasant results, that's all you have to focus on. The simple patterns. Try to create as many skillful causes as you can, and learn to have some patience as the results take their time to work out. Second, about scale invariance. If you understand your mind here in the present moment, you understand the issues of becoming throughout the universe, and vice versa. This is why, when we focus on the breath right now, we're learning about principles at work in our experience of the entire cosmos. It's also why learning about karma on the large scale can help us in our understanding of the mind in the here and now. The third principle is that you can attain something that is unconditioned by developing the conditions of your mind. This is what makes ultimate freedom possible, and why fabricating a path to an unfabricated dimension actually makes sense. A healthy understanding of karma. We talked last night about how karma is often misunderstood and as a result, often disliked. Part of the problem, in America at least, is that the teaching on karma is sometimes seen as psychologically unhealthy. This is because it's believed to be deterministic. As a result, the complaint is that the idea of karma makes people get fatalistic about their own suffering, complacent about their pleasure, and callous and indifferent to other people's suffering. But this view is based on a misunderstanding of the Buddha's actual teachings on karma. Tonight I would like to show how the Buddha taught karma in a way that is psychologically very healthy. The first step will be to talk about what constitutes a healthy attitude toward action. The second step will be to see how the Buddha taught a healthy attitude toward action to his own son, Rahula. And then the third step will be to draw some implications from what he taught Rahula. To begin with, suppose you have a child. When you train your child, what principles would you want to teach the child to give it a healthy attitude to his or her own actions? The first principle would be, think before you act. Choose carefully what you want to do, because your actions do have results. Some actions can be very harmful, others can be very helpful. That's the first principle, the principle of heedfulness. The second principle would be, your intentions make a difference. If the child breaks something intentionally, the punishment should be very different from when he breaks it unintentionally. The third principle would be, pay attention to what you're doing and see the results you're getting. If you see that you're doing something hurtful, stop. Further, if you see you've done something harmful, resolve not to repeat it. This is the principle of compassion. The next principle would be, admit your mistakes. If you broke something, don't say that it was already broken before you stepped on it. If you've made a mistake, talk it over. Don't be debilitated by remorse. But at the same time, don't be callous about the harm you've done. This is the principle of integrity along with truthfulness. Finally, learn from your mistakes so that you don't have to repeat them. Now, in order to teach your child these principles, you have to be a good parent too. If your child comes and says that he crashed your car, take a long, deep breath and tell him not to do it again. If you fly off the handle, your child will never admit a mistake to you ever again. So these are the basic principles in teaching a healthy attitude toward action and toward the mistakes people make in their actions. Nobody is born totally perfect, so we have to be willing to admit the fact that we will make mistakes. But we should also be willing to learn from them. These are actually the same principles that the Buddha taught to his son, Rahula. The commentary says that Rahula was 7 years old when the Buddha gave him those instructions. The basic instructions are these. The first principle is to be truthful, which means not only being truthful to other people, but also being truthful to yourself. As the Buddha told Rahula, if you feel no shame at telling a deliberate lie, you're totally empty of goodness. Truth is the basis for all progress in the life of the mind. Then the Buddha taught Rahula how to use his actions as a way of purifying his heart and mind. First, he said, before you act, ask yourself, what are the consequences you anticipate from the action? This applies to actions of the body, actions of speech, actions of mind. If you foresee any harm from the action, don't do it. If you don't foresee any harm, you can go ahead and do it. While you're doing it, if you see that it's causing any unexpected harm, stop. If you don't see any harm, you can continue with the action. Once the action is done, you're still not done. You have to look at the long-term consequences. If you see that the action did cause harm, talk it over with someone else who has experience on the path to gain that person's perspective on what you did wrong and what might have been better to do instead, and then resolve not to repeat the same mistake again. If you don't see any harmful consequences, take pride in the fact that your practice is developing and continue trying to get better and better. When you look at these instructions, you see that they embody the 4 principles of a healthy attitude toward action: heedfulness, compassion, truthfulness, and integrity. heedfulness in that you take the results of your actions seriously, compassion in that you don't want to do any harm, truthfulness in your willingness to admit your mistakes, and integrity in taking responsibility for any harm that you've done. These are good qualities to bring to meditation practice as well. Other lessons that can be drawn from these instructions concerning the nature of action. What might be called the metaphysical implications of a psychologically healthy attitude toward our power of choice and the power of our actions. 1. You are free in how you choose to act. If you didn't have freedom of choice, the whole idea of teaching a path of practice to put an end to suffering wouldn't make any sense, for no one could choose whether to follow the path or not. 2. Actions have results. 3. Your intentions are important, but good intentions are not enough. You have to learn how to make your intentions skillful. This is why we have to check the results of our actions. Simply meaning, well, we can still cause harm. It's through experience, learning from our mistakes, that we learn what genuinely is helpful and genuinely is harmful. In fact, to see things in this way is the beginning of wisdom. You may remember from the first passage in the Karma readings that the question leading to discernment is, what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? The wisdom here consists in understanding two things. The first is realizing that happiness and suffering come from your actions. And the second is realizing that long-term happiness is better than short-term. There's a passage in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says that if you see a long-term happiness that would come from abandoning a short-term happiness, you should be willing to give up the short-term happiness for the sake of the long-term. A British translator once translated this passage into English and added a footnote saying that this could not possibly be what the passage really means, because the principle is so basic that everybody knows it. Still, even though everybody may know it, not everybody acts on it, which is why the Buddha has to remind us. A fourth metaphysical implication that can also be drawn from the Buddha's instructions to Rahula is that the results of actions follow a pattern. Otherwise, you couldn't learn from a mistake. If you do one thing today and the same thing tomorrow but get different results, you can't learn from your past actions. However, it's because there is a pattern to actions and their results that we can learn. This pattern has two features. In some cases, you do an action and you can see the results immediately. This is why the Buddha recommends looking for the results of an action while you're doing it. In other cases, you don't see the results until a long time after. This is why he recommends checking the results of the action after it's done. Sometimes the patterns combine, so that you see the results both immediately and after a long time. As we will see tomorrow, these two features of the causal pattern are very important. The fact that they are actually two patterns interacting is what allows the Buddha's teachings on causality to avoid determinism on the one hand and chaos on the other. In other words, there are patterns, so there is no chaos. But you are free in the present moment to change your actions, which means that there is no strict determinism. In this way, the Buddha finds a middle way that allows for freedom within the patterns of cause and effect in our actions. In fact, these interacting patterns form the basic metaphysical principle on the nature of causality that the Buddha discovered in the course of his awakening. Together, they form the fourth metaphysical implication of a healthy psychological attitude toward actions. That actions have a pattern that we can learn and master, but that the pattern is not deterministic. We can use our understanding of this pattern to manipulate causes and effects in the direction we want. This pattern and its implications will be the theme for tomorrow night's talk. Finally, the instructions to Rahula carry some implications in terms of the qualities of mind that need to be trained in order to follow this practice. The first quality is attention. In particular, appropriate attention, asking the right questions about your actions before you do them, while you're doing them, after they're done. The second quality is ardency, which is the wholehearted desire to be skillful. This grows directly from appropriate attention. If you see that something is skillful, you want with your whole heart to develop it. If you see that something is unskillful, you want with your whole heart to avoid it. This connects with the principles of heedfulness and compassion. When these two principles combine, they form the foundation of wisdom and discernment. The third quality you need to develop is alertness, the ability to see clearly what you're doing while you're doing it and the results you're actually getting as they arise. In other words, you don't see just what you hope to be getting. You see what actually happens as a result of your actions. This connects to the principle of honesty or truthfulness. The fourth quality is mindfulness, remembering to keep asking the right questions, the ability to remember your purpose in practicing, and also the ability to remember what you've learned from past actions, where to look in the present moment, and how to handle different issues as they come up. When you combine mindfulness with ardency, they connect with the principle of integrity, in that you want to remember your mistakes and not repeat them. These four qualities are the qualities that go together in establishing mindfulness, which is the topic for tomorrow morning's talk. All of these qualities should be developed in all of your actions, which is why the Buddha's instructions to Rahula are a good example of how to give beginning instructions in meditation. The Pali word for meditation, bhavana, means to develop, and specifically, to develop good qualities of mind. Now, this process doesn't begin only when you sit down with your eyes closed. It begins in the way you conduct your entire life, because the same mind is acting in all circumstances, whether your eyes are opened or closed. If you're dishonest in your daily life, you'll find it hard to be honest with yourself in meditation. If you're careless in your daily actions, it's hard to be careful as you meditate. As I said earlier today, having purified virtue is one of the qualities that develop mindfulness. And one of the reasons why this is so is that the qualities of mind implicated in the Buddha's instructions to Rahula are developed through observing the precepts. To observe the precepts requires these same qualities of mind. You need to use appropriate attention to ask yourself how you will observe the precepts in your life, and in particular, what changes you need to make in your behavior to bring it in line with the precepts. You also need ardency in the wholehearted desire to follow the precepts strictly, alertness to make sure that you really are following them, and finally, mindfulness in keeping the precepts in mind. Without these qualities, you cannot observe the precepts. When you observe the precepts, you reinforce these qualities. When they're reinforced, you can bring those developed qualities into your meditation. It's important to realize that the lessons from these instructions to Rahula go all the way from the most basic level of the practice to the highest. When the Buddha, in another context, discusses the role of emptiness as applied to concentration practice, he tells you to examine your state of mind to see where it still contains disturbance and where it's empty of disturbance. If you detect any disturbance, you ask yourself what you're doing in your concentration to cause that disturbance. When you see a perception that causes a disturbance, you let it go. In the same way that the Buddha told Rahula to examine his actions and let go of any unskillful ones. As you follow this process of looking for disturbances and their causes, and letting go of the causes, the state of mind empty of disturbance gets greater and greater. The disturbances and the perceptions causing them get more and more subtle until you finally reach awakening. This process follows the same pattern that the Buddha taught to Rahula. Examining your actions, seeing the causes and the results in your mind in the present moment, letting go of anything unskillful. This can take you all the way to the end of the path. Several years back, when I was teaching the passage on the Buddha's teachings to Rahula to a group of people in America, there was a psychotherapist in the group. She was teaching a mindfulness-based therapy group, and so she took the instructions to Rahula, copied them out, gave them to the members of the group for their last session together the next day. After they had read the passage, she asked them, "What do you think of the Buddha as a teacher and a parent? They replied, "If our parents had taught us like this, we wouldn't need you now."